All right, let's jump right in. I'm going to say a word, and I just want you to notice what pops into your head. Ready? The word is Tantra. Now, for a lot of us, that word probably makes you think of some pretty specific things. Maybe exotic rituals, maybe sting, and almost definitely something to do with sex. But what if I told you that entire image is basically the result of a misunderstanding that's been going on for over 100 years? In this explainer, we're going to dig into the amazing scholarly work of David Barton Gray to uncover the real profound philosophy that's been hiding in plain sight.
No, really? Take a second. What picture came to mind? Was it something from a movie? Something you read in a magazine? That pop culture version is so powerful, it has almost completely buried the original, and frankly, radical meaning of these ancient traditions. And this isn't some new mistake. The story of how Tantra even got introduced to the West is all about misinterpretation, deep cultural bias, and honestly, a fascination with the scandalous parts that completely miss the entire point. To really get how we got here, we've got to go back in time, back to that very first encounter. Okay, so before we can even begin to talk about what Tantra is, we first have to peel back all these layers of myth that have been built up around it. So let's start there. How did the West first come to see this tradition?
Yeah, these ideas you see here, they didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They were actually shaped by the very first Western scholars who studied tantric texts. See, back in the colonial era, they latched onto the parts that seemed the most foreign and, let's be honest, the most shocking to their Victorian worldview, especially anything remotely erotic. And from there, they framed the whole thing as this corrupt, magical, and even dangerous offshoot of what they considered pure religion.
So why did that happen? Well, it wasn't just some simple mix-up. It was a product of its time. You have to remember, this was a period of colonialism where European powers often looked at the cultures they were encountering through this lens of superiority. I mean, just get a load of this quote. This comes directly from a super prominent 19th century scholar. This wasn't a fringe opinion, this was the mainstream academic view. He called the entire tradition an aberration of the human mind. Wow. The dismissal in that phrase alone tells you everything about their starting point. There was zero attempt at real understanding. And that's the key thing to get here. These early scholars weren't neutral observers, not at all. They were working with a colonial mindset, and they were judging everything against their own cultural and religious yardstick. So native traditions were often just dismissed as superstitious or idolatrous. And Tantra, with all its complex rituals and symbolism, was basically the perfect target for this kind of prejudice. And this just shows you exactly how they did it. Instead of trying to understand the tradition on its own terms, they filtered it. They would literally just pull out one single, supposedly scandalous passage from a really complex text, totally ignore the centuries of commentary explaining what it actually meant, and then hold it up as proof that the whole thing was degenerate. They read the words, sure, but they ignored the living, breathing context of the rituals, the society, and the philosophy behind it all. Okay, so now that we've seen how this whole thing got so twisted, let's try to build a more accurate picture. And believe it or not, we have to start with the words themselves, because a huge part of the confusion comes from a simple linguistic mistake that had massive consequences. This right here is so important. The word tantrism, with the ism, is a complete Western invention. It doesn't exist in Sanskrit. Scholars basically made it up, and when they did, they just crammed hundreds of diverse and distinct traditions into one single monolithic ism. The much more accurate term is the adjective, tantric. That describes a certain quality or a methodology that you can find within different traditions, like Tantric Buddhism or Tantric Hinduism. And the word Tantra itself, it's actually beautiful. It comes from this Sanskrit root that means to stretch or to weave. So think of a loom with a single, continuous thread weaving this incredibly complex pattern. That's the idea. It's about weaving all of life, the good, the bad, the beautiful, the messy, the whole shebang into the path of awakening. The goal isn't to run away from the world, it's to engage with it completely. And that idea of full engagement, well, that leads us right to the absolute core of the tantric worldview. And honestly, it's nothing short of revolutionary. It's like a kind of spiritual alchemy, a process of deep, profound transformation. So many spiritual paths are what you'd call ascetic. They teach that to get enlightened, you have to renounce the world. You've got to stamp out passion, desire, attachment, because all those things are seen as obstacles, as poisons. The tantric path completely flips this on its head. It says all that stuff, passion, desire, all the powerful energies of being human. They aren't obstacles. They are the actual fuel for your awakening. There's this powerful line from the ancient texts that just nails this idea perfectly. It says that the very things that bind us up in knots, our anger, our greed, our attachments, that stuff can become the raw material for our own liberation. The secret isn't getting rid of them, it's learning the liberative art of transforming them.
So how does this alchemy even work? Well, you can think of it as a three-step process. First, you have to fully acknowledge the so-called poisons, all those powerful emotions. You don't push them down or pretend they're not there. Second, using wisdom, you look into their real nature and realize they're not these solid, permanent things you thought they were. And finally, you transmute them. Passion gets transformed into wisdom. Aggression becomes crystal clear clarity. It's literally like turning lead into gold.
And let's be crystal clear about this. This is not a free pass for hedonism. It is the exact opposite. Just indulging in something reinforces the poison. It makes the chain stronger. Transmutation, on the other hand, is a highly disciplined, super rigorous practice. It requires deep wisdom and expert guidance. It's all about mastering the energy, not just being swept away by it.
Now, what's so incredible is that this philosophy wasn't just some psychological revolution. In the context of ancient India, it was a full-blown social one. This way of thinking was just utterly radical for its time. I mean, just think about it for a second. In a society that was completely defined by a rigid caste system, tantric traditions basically blew the doors wide open. They offered a path to enlightenment that was available to everyone. That meant women, that meant people from the lowest castes, the so-called untouchables. Your spiritual potential had nothing to do with who your parents were. Instead, authority came from your direct relationship with a teacher, a guru. It completely redefined purity as an internal state of mind, not something you get from external social rituals.
So we've gone on quite a journey here, from a Western myth that was born from colonial bias all the way to a deeply profound and socially revolutionary spiritual philosophy. And all this incredible insight comes from the deep scholarly work of David Barton Gray in his dissertation on supreme bliss. We've seen that Tantra isn't about indulging desire, but about the incredible alchemy of transforming our most difficult emotions into wisdom and bliss, a path that's open to absolutely everyone.
And this really leaves us with a huge thought to carry with us. So much of our modern culture is about fixing our flaws, right? Eliminating our weaknesses, suppressing our negative emotions. But what if those ancient tantric practitioners were onto something really profound? What if the real path to being whole isn't about cutting parts of ourselves away, but about learning the art of transforming them into our greatest strength?